the biggest bit of my brain is focused on what I'm looking at on screen, the movements, what people are doing, so that I can match that from shot to shot to shot to shot, and where things are, what shoulder a bag is on. That's what I'll be looking at, what hand a cup is in, when that cup gets lifted, when they take the bag off, when they sit down, when their coat comes off. That's the stuff I'm looking at. I'm not necessarily looking at, is that the same coat as that scene? I will always like have a quick check before we start shooting that they're in the right costume, but it's not necessarily my main focus. That's what costume are there for.
Welcome to Filmmaking Framed, your video podcast uncovering the realities of filmmaking. I'm your host, Danion Hughes.
And I'm your host, Tom Dexter.
With us today is Stu Laurie, script supervisor on projects such as All of Us Strangers, Miracle Club, and Silent Witness. Great to have you with us, Stu.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
So, Stu, let's delve right in. Can you define the role of a script supervisor?
How do I start? I get asked that a lot, to be honest, and different people say different things. To me, what it comes down to is you're there to protect the integrity of the narrative and the script. And what that means is you're there to make sure that everything in the script is covered, or more to the point, everything that the director wants to cover that is in the script, because that isn't always everything that's in the script. You make sure that you are protecting coverage for the edit, to make sure that everything you need is there to tell the story that you want to tell. And you're making sure that everything cuts together physically, so people's movements, how they interact with props, everything like that cuts between shots, and also the emotional continuity within the film. Basically making sure everything makes sense when you put it together. In a nutshell, is what we're there for.
And you mentioned that everything the director wants isn't necessarily the same thing as everything in the script. Could you delve into some detail about that?
Yeah, I think it's very rare for the finished product to be exactly what was on the page, because as soon as you step onto a set, something goes wrong, or actually that looks better, that feels better. And a lot of people will have notes, be it the actor, maybe the DP, if you've got producers knocking around, and even heads of department, costume, makeup, me, will often have ideas or thoughts that maybe will change what you're doing, or something just physically does not work on the set. Especially if you're on location, weather could change, anything could happen that means you have to think on the fly and change to make it work. So my job then is to make sure that what you do change still makes sense with what has happened or will happen. Like actors may want to change dialogue because something sounds more natural, which is great, assuming you're not changing something that is referenced later or is important later for the story or for their character arc.
That makes a lot of sense.
Good.
Because particularly if you want to foreshadow something and seeing the actors like, well, I want to say this one. It's like, okay, but then that won't pay off.
Exactly. And sometimes another actor will directly quote something that somebody else says or use something somebody else says as a story beat later. So you need to, especially if you're doing episodic TV and you're doing 4 episodes of something, but 3 episodes later can reflect something that happened in episode 1. Somebody there needs to be keeping track of changes to make sure that it doesn't affect anything that happens later. And that's usually me.
It sounds like you have to have a really strong knowledge of the script. So what's the process for you in terms of breaking down a script, in terms of managing it when it's constantly changing, and also your relationship with, this is 3 big questions, relationship with the screenwriters and development people in that process?
It varies depending on the project. It varies depending on how much prep I have, which can be anything from 3 days to 3 or 4 weeks. The more, the better. The longer I have, the more familiar with the script I am. I try and all script supervisors do specific breakdowns. So the very first thing you'll normally be asked to do is time it. So you time each scene and then you add it together to get the whole runtime. That's usually what producers want straight away, to go, it's too short, it's too long, we need to add this, we need to take this away. So that's one breakdown. So the very first thing I do is just read it, just to get an idea of what it is. Then you break it down for timing. Then the next thing you'll probably want to do is break it down for story chronology. So on most projects, I'm the person that creates the story days and then the times of day for each scene within those story days. But also, if it spans over years, I'm usually the one being specific as to what month of each year each bit relates to. Um, because it helps all of us understand the story as a whole and the time that it takes for that story to develop, because that can affect a myriad of things for the director and the actors. Often they will need to know this happened days, weeks, months, years before or after this thing, because it will affect how they perform it. Art department will want to know that because they're making graphics, they're setting watches, clocks. Costume will want to know because they're setting watches. So that's something you need to do very quickly, and that's when you really get into the script, because that's when you start really looking at detail, because you want to work out when things happen. And this is the point where you then send off points and comments to development producers, which will also probably go to either normally script editors rather than writers. I don't tend to have direct contact with writers. It's usually script editors, producers that will filter my notes to the writer. So when you're doing all your story chronology is usually when you come up with all of your questions and points, mostly to do with logic, story logic. This can't happen here because of this. This day is 48 hours long, given what's happening within it. All those kinds of things that help you then really become very close to the story, the characters, the arcs. That's really when you get to know it. And there are then various other breakdowns where you read it again and again and again and again. And I always try and read the script as many times as possible before I get to set on the first day of shooting, so I know it. And then when it changes, you have an understanding of what that may affect, because you know, hopefully, know the script well enough to know that. But when amends come in prep, it's not so bad because you're prepping, so you have time to sit down and go, okay, this changes this changes that. When amends come in during the shoot, it's much more difficult because you just don't have time to sit down and look at it properly, as it were, because you're doing a 12-hour shoot day. Then you've got all your reports to do when you get home. That can be more difficult. You try and, I think the more you spend time on set, you know when you've got the chance to go and do your own thing. So as soon as somebody says we're turning around, so we're turning the camera interface the other way, I'm like, oh, good, I've probably got about 20 minutes that I can go and do something. So that's when you kind of track what those amends are, what they might change. And it's, in some ways, when you're on the floor, it's possibly a bit easier because you've got the director there, you've got producers there, you've got people, or the art department, whomever there, that you can bounce things off. My prep tends to be on my own, so it's a little bit more difficult. Yeah, tracking it, I think we all do it differently. For me, it's just making a load of notes. It's knowing what the important beats are within each scene, and if an amend comes in, are those beats still there? And if they're not, what does that change within the story?
How's your relationship with the director? Because presumably the director will want to interpret the script in a certain way. So what they think are the most important beats might be different from your initial read.
Mm-hmm.
So how does the director come into your process?
I will always speak to a director in prep as much as I can. They're obviously incredibly busy. By the time I come on board, they are doing recce's, they're doing storyboarding with the DP, they're doing shot listing with the DP. So trying to find time for me can be pretty tough. So I try and get into as many meetings as I can, production meetings, try and get into VFX meetings, anywhere where I can listen to the director and learn how it is they want to tell the story without having to take a couple of hours of their time to do it. But I will always try and get a meeting with them just to chat to them really and understand what their process is and how they like to work. I think over time I've found it quite easy, not easy, but I've learned how to read a director and understand what it is they need from a script.
You're doing a director breakdown as well as a script
Yeah,
breakdown.
pretty much. I did one of the script supervising courses I did is called the Director Whisperer course by Daniela Sayoni. and it is kind of about getting into the director's head and finding out what story they want to tell rather than the story that I'd want to tell if I was making it. It's just about talking to them and communicating and not being afraid to bring things up. When we're shooting, we will rehearse a scene and I might say, I think we might be missing this. And they're like, no, I don't need that. Okay, cool.
You just make a note of that.
Yeah. Or, I mean,
it.
it depends how important I think it is. If I think it's something we really need, then I might push harder and be like, well, actually, this informs this later. Or if we don't get this now, does this work? Because sometimes we all get tunnel vision when we're doing a specific scene. And you may forget that in 18 scenes time, it becomes important. So it's just about talking, really, and not being afraid to have conversations with people that might intimidate you.
Sounds like there's a really good skill as a script supervisor is to not direct it yourself. Because I know when I went to film school and there were people who weren't directors working on films and they would direct it. They, in their head, they knew how they would make it. And that was actually counterproductive.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a really good skill for a script supervisor to have is to be able to interpret a script and have all that in your head, but not be trying to direct it yourself.
Yeah, you are trying to be as invisible as possible, but there when you need to speak up. I guess if everything's going really well, you'll never hear me speak. You're trying to not get in the way. And I think, like you say, if there's too many, it's like too many chefs in the kitchen. If there's too many voices, it becomes too blurry. You don't need me to be telling you how to direct. You're a director. I'm not. I know how I would do things, but that isn't necessarily the story you want to tell. So I just need to be telling your story, not mine.
Have you ever had an experience on set where other heads of department are coming in with suggestions that just totally break down the script in a way that, but in terms of it doesn't work anymore? So a DOP maybe or a production designer is like, well, what if we did this? And you're sitting there going, well, it doesn't work. And
yeah,
they'll get the director excited in a direction, and you're gonna have to go, hang on, guys.
Every single job. Yeah, and it's, you try and build, especially because I'm a one-person department, generally speaking, you try and build relationships before you start shooting so that when you do have to go in and go, you're wrong, it's less confrontational. And some of those relationships are really difficult. The relationships with DPs in particular can be quite difficult because I think they often think I am stamping on their creative ideas, and I'm not. I just want to make sure that everything works. We're a team. We're working together. That's, if I'm wrong, tell me.
And the DOP is going to feel a bit silly if the edit doesn't work because
Exactly.
they shot something that or didn't shoot something that they needed to.
Yeah, and it's all about collaboration, isn't it? That's what a film set is. It's not one person. It's all of us coming together to create something. So when people do come up with silly ideas, you do have to be like, actually, as cool as that might be, it's not going to fit in with everything else.
In a scenario where, and this probably almost never happens, but in a scenario where you say you've got 3 really egotistical, overconfident HODs, so a director, a DOP, and a production designer, say, and they all want to go down a route that just doesn't work, what recourse do you have as a script supervisor in order to nip it in the bud? If they're just not listening to you, you're on the set.
You can't.
You can't.
You can't. I mean,
You would put that in your report, and the producer would become aware of it, and then it's up to the producer to handle it.
Pretty much. Like, I can't trump a director or a DP, really. Hopefully, and especially now that people are understanding what the role is a bit more, you get more respect and understanding. Understanding is a better word than respect, of why your opinion matters. So people listen to you maybe more than they did 5 or 6 years ago when I started. But if they're adamant that this is what they want, as long as I've said, I do not think this is going to work and this is why, there's not much else. Like, I can't force them to shoot something.
Why do you think there's more understanding now?
I think it's becoming, it's becoming more taught. Like, it never used to be part of any kind of curriculum at all. And I think it's becoming more of a popular job. It used to be viewed as kind of a secretary. and nobody really kind of wanted it. Whereas now I think because people are starting to understand what the job is a bit more, and why it's important, and how kind of, I'm very biased, but how cool it is, because you get to be next to the director. You get to be like right in the middle of everything that's going on. So I think people are now understanding more, just because it's becoming a slightly more popular role, maybe, and becoming more known in courses and student films and things like that. Whereas before it just kind of be overlooked as something you don't really need. And I think now that's less so. There's like screen skills more. There's more traineeships. It's becoming a slightly bigger department. So we're trying to get more trainees and more assistants. So I think it's becoming more respected, I guess, as a profession.
I suppose as productions get bigger over time as well, it allows, with bigger budgets, it allows that growth. And
Yeah, exactly. And I think the importance of the job is becoming more understood.
And that also makes sense with the kind of rise of high-profile television, because while obviously there are, it's becoming almost ubiquitous of big movies to have reshoots, at least in a film there is, in theory, one script. Whereas a character arc over a television show, and you have different directors directing different episodes, so different visions in that way, so different directors wanting to allow actors to. So it makes sense why you're one of those people that is a continuous presence across different directors.
Well, actually, we're not, because we
Interesting.
change. So you usually get the director will change, the first AD will change, and the script soup will change, and maybe the DP will change.
Interesting.
And the rest of the crew remains the same. So on Silent Witness, on Casualty, on what else have I done? Doctors, Holby, all of these kind of continuing jobs that are block after block after block after block. There will always be a different director, a different script soup, a different DP, which seems insane, a different DP, but all the other departments, so the camera, costume, makeup, art, they all stay the same throughout, so at least you have some kind of continuity. And obviously the producers are always the same.
why do they swap them, do you think?
I think because it's impossible to prep that amount of work. So even if you did a block on, a block off, you still couldn't do continuous. There's no way that you could, as a director, at least prep.
What about as a script supervisor?
No, not really. There's no way I could prep for
A year's worth of filming at once.
Yeah, I just couldn't. There's no way, not at all. I'd have to take time off.
You'd end up sitting there going, like, I don't know what comes up
Yeah.
next, but I'm
What
here
script?
still. Yeah, I was here 2 months ago as well, but I don't know what's coming up. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to hold so much in your head that it's impossible to keep that amount of information.
Do you get to communicate with the script supervisors coming up or preceding you?
Depending on the job, yeah. So if it's a job that has continuity over episodes, yes. Again, on stuff like Casualty, Silent Witness, they're standalone. They have overarching stories, but you have a script team that are over that. So your script editors and your story producers and everything will be over that kind of narrative and emotional arc. And the directors will have a lot more time in prep to go through what's just happened, what's happening next. So they will have a much stronger understanding of characters' arcs over preceding episodes and the next.
And you'll be having meetings with those producers and development people while you're during your prep phase anyway. So they'll be able to keep you on top of what will just happen.
If there's anything that I need to be, yes, but usually the director will be prepped for everything that needs to be adhered to. And you'll always have producers around. There'll always be people that know better than me. It's more when you get on films and standalone series, limited series, where it will just be you for the entire sort of 5 episodes. That's when it becomes a little bit more difficult, and you lean on producers and stuff a little bit more, because they'll have had much longer to get their head around the script than you.
And they might have been developing it for years before it got financed. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've done a couple where it's just been me. The Walk-In in particular was one that I did that was 5 episodes that were about 50 minutes. And that was a heck of a lot to keep, because you're cross-boarding as well. So on one day you could be doing all 5 episodes, depending on the location. Yeah, it's insane. That's when you need an assistant to have another brain on it as well as you. It is really tough. But that was just 5 episodes. If I then had another 5 to do, there's no way, absolutely no way, not without a break to separate it.
Yeah, because there'll be a prop that gets removed, and you'll be like, which timeline are we on? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And I've done a lot of procedurals, and I'm on one right now, which is the Chelsea Detective, and you've got things like evidence boards, and they change throughout the shoot. George will tell you this, that trying to keep track of that
George props
Yes.
from episode 7. If people want to check that out.
We're just doing 2 episodes. George is doing all 4, but as a script supervisor, I'm only doing 2, and that was difficult enough to track. So doing that over an entire series, yeah, it's impossible.
I suppose it's like, if people listen to this, maybe if they haven't worked in film before, it's like, I suppose it's, if you were trying to manage your own calendar of what you've got coming up, right? I find everyone finds that a little bit challenging in some way. It's like, when's my dentist appointment? Oh, when was I going to do that? And then you've got to also manage Danion's calendar, and then I'm going to manage your calendar, and then I'm going to manage 6 other people's calendar. Now suddenly I've got to remember where each of you need to go to the dentist at what time and what the appointment is. That it spirals, and then eventually you just can't hold all that in a head. You'd have to.
Yeah, and I think again, because generally speaking, it's just me. Like, I don't have a second AD, a third AD, or an assistant standby props, an assistant art director, and all of those things to help me manage it. On bigger shows, yes, on bigger budget Band 4 stuff, bigger budget films, all that kind of thing, then you likely would. But when it's just you, it's tough. It's part of the job, and it's part of the job I really enjoy. But yeah, I couldn't do it for more than sort of 5 eps. It'd be insanity.
What are some of the reports that you're writing at the end of the day?
So we have the daily progress report is probably the first thing that you send off. That goes to production. I fill out all my reports as the day goes, just so when I get to the end, I don't have 3 hours worth of work to do. So you have your daily progress report, which highlights what you shot that day, what you maybe didn't shoot that day that you should have, what you keep track of running times. So what you've shot previously, how long it was running, what you shot today, how does that affect your running time? Are you going over? Are you going under? How many scenes have you got left to shoot? How many pages of the script have you got left to shoot? So you're constantly tracking where you're at. That goes to production, who then put it in their production reports that goes off to the execs and all the big people.
Forgive me, with runtime, I'm imagining different takes have slight variations in length. So how do you pick the runtime that you're putting in your report?
So I time it from action to cut.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, it will only be seconds that you're different, and you basically pick whichever the best take was, and you go with that. So the director will tell you, I like that one.
Got you.
Sometimes it might be like, I like a bit of that take, a bit of that take, and a bit of that take, but generally it's not that.
Your margin for error is sufficiently small. It doesn't need to be exact.
Yeah. And also it doesn't, when it gets to the edit, that's going to change again.
Yeah.
So they'll start chopping stuff up and moving things around and changing it anyway. So your runtime will change again, but it's mostly for production to know if we're going way over, should we start cutting stuff, or we're never going to make it, or if we're going way under, oh boy,
Yeah.
get writing.
And in that report, I'm guessing you're like, if we haven't shot this scene, it's like, are you doing some kind of highlighting of the importance of what has been missed?
I always track what we owe, and that gets given to production and the ADs as well, because they're the first AD is the person that schedules everything. It's less about what bits of that scene were most important. That's more for the director and the producers to decide. I'm just saying, this is what we need to get. This is what we haven't done, and we should have. And then if they're like, well, actually, we just need to get this, that's kind of on them.
So what I mean is, for example, if you had you're shooting a crime drama and a criminal gives a key piece of evidence that will help the detectives, and then you don't make it to that scene, that's one where it's like the story will suffer some kind of a breakdown. Yeah. Would you procure emphasis, or is it one where it's so clear to everyone that scene needs to be in there?
In theory, the latter. It's not always the way, but I will always be flagging what we owe, and I will, in my discussion, say this is something I think we have to get story-wise. Hopefully, your director and your producers know that, but it never hurts to reiterate it. And another report that I do, which is a weekly report, is a log of everything that we've done, everything that we've part completed, and everything that we still owe. And all of that will be in there. So, and that again goes to producers and directors.
And then that could be so different. For example, if we shot this scene, and then the director has had a chance to look it back during the week, and he's like, actually, I now want to reschedule that.
Mm-hmm.
You will then at the weekly report take that away and say, it still needs to now be shot.
Yeah, basically. Or if there's pickups, or the editor has said, actually, I think we need to get a pickup of this. This isn't clear. We need this to help tell the story. This didn't work. Then that will be in there as well. And I will be in communication with the editor throughout the shoot about anything that hasn't worked, anything we need to pick up. Again, that will also go to director, producers, and the first AD, so they know that they need to schedule it. But I will be keeping track of where we are and what we owe. So that's one report. I also have my continuity sheets. Different people call them different things: facing pages, continuity notes, continuity sheets. It's basically a sheet of information about you have one per shot or one per slate, and it will tell the editor what was in this shot, what kind of shot it was, who was in it, what dialogue was covered, what scene it's for, and then you have a list of takes, and you'll have which takes were best or which bits of which takes worked. And it's basically giving the editor as much information as possible so they know what the director liked on set, what worked, what didn't. It just makes it a bit easier for the editor to create assemblies, hopefully based on what the director actually wanted. It saves time, basically, hopefully. And then you're doing your line script. So you have in each scene, you'll have lines that correlate to the slate number, which is in your continuity sheets. This gets quite complicated, sorry. Welcome to my world. So they'll be numbered based on the slate, and that will demonstrate what bits of the script you covered, because not every slate will cover the entirety of that scene. So you might only do a close-up for 4 lines of dialogue because you really want to hit a beat within those 4 lines. So you'll just have a little line in your script that just covers those lines. Again, it's a visual representation for the edit assistant and the editor to know what covered what. So they're not trying to create a jigsaw without any picture, basically. You also have your editor's log, which is a chronological list of every shot you did for the day. Again, it's for the edit assistant to know where things are, and that will have, it's basically information taken from your continuity sheets in a shorter, quicker form. And it's just a list, and it'll have like the card number, the sound roll, where they can find everything and what it is, and anything they might need to know, like if it was MOS, so if it was without sound, if the frame rate changed for whatever reason, anything like that.
So you're making these reports because camera are also writing reports on this sort of stuff. And
cameras will be more detailed in terms of camera information, and there's different script supervisors do slightly different things. I take whatever information is on my monitor, basically, which can be lens, FPS, ISO. If we're doing VFX stuff, you tend to take more because you'll want distances and things like that for the edit. But again, camera will also be doing that. So mine's more of a fail-safe, just in case. And mine tend to get to the editor a bit quicker than cameras. And the editor's already kind of looking at mine. So
why is it that yours would get there first?
Because I email mine directly to the editor at the end of the day. It may be that the camera, because they have to write theirs up, so it may be that theirs get there a little bit later. Depending on the shoot, I may also be sending mine at lunchtime, depending on what the editor wants. And just because mine tend to be the first ones that get opened.
And you're not packing down loads of kit at the end of the day, so you can just get your work done.
Mine tends to be off to the editor within an hour of wrap, whereas cameras may not, depending on what they're doing. There's a bit of a bone of contention that we shouldn't be doing it because camera are, which is fine. If some script soups don't want to do it, then that's entirely up to them. It's kind of a habit, to be honest, that I do it. It's literally on a screen in front of me. It takes me.
Would you be requested to do it, or is it something that you
I've-
choose to do because you think it's extra detail that helps? Like,
That-
would
yeah.
a
I've
producer
never-
or editor wouldn't go, "I need you to do this."
Not in my experience. I've never been asked to do it when it's not been there, if that makes sense. And there are some days where we move so quickly that I just don't have time to do it. And that's kind of the first thing that probably drops when we're being really quick guerrilla style running around the street. Point and shoot, go, because they're going to get that information from a different department anyway. So it isn't something that we are necessarily required to do. It's just a little
Going above and
Extra.
beyond.
extra bit that
Yeah.
I do out of habit.
So it sounds like as a script supervisor, you have to be incredibly organized, incredibly on top of the paperwork, and also, would you say, quite good at creatively interpreting scripts? So also having that creative side as well as being
Mhm.
organized. What would you say are the skills that make a really good script supervisor?
I think you need to understand story. I think you need to understand how a script and a story works, how beats work, how pacing works. You need to understand editing. You need to be able to edit in your head as you go. You need to know how things are going to look when they're cut together so that you know what matters. Because you don't have to be militant about every single little thing. It's impossible to know every little thing. You're itching to ask me a question.
I am. I was going to say, are there any books or courses you'd recommend to develop those skills?
Yes. So the one I mentioned, which was the Director Whisperer, which is Daniela Sayoni, Dawn Gilliam's Art of Continuity. The one thing I will say is they're both American Canadian based, and there are some subtle differences, but they are highlighted within the course. So the job is the same. It's more the paperwork that changes slightly, but they're both really good in-depth courses that don't just look at paperwork. They look at every aspect, which includes understanding editing. And I think, especially in Daniela's, there are interviews with editors that you can listen to. Editing podcasts are really useful. What do I listen to? I can send you a list of like everything that
That
would
would be amazing. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. There are certain books that help. Again, they're mostly US based, but really it's about doing it. To be honest, that's the easiest way. Watch films, look at how they're edited, look when people move and when things get cut, when the cuts, because it's usually on a movement that a cut will happen, and you'll understand
Why is that?
because you can't see the cut if someone's moving. It feels smoother. If you move on a movement, it feels less than if
Drives the momentum a bit as well,
yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah, exactly. It just feels a bit smoother in the cut. And if you watch it with that in your mind, you can see what would matter and what wouldn't. And it's also about talking to your director, knowing what their cut is, when they want to use specific shots, and over time you kind of develop a sense of what works and what doesn't.
That sounds like being a good listener is a very good
Huge.
skill
And
for
communication.
Yeah.
So I think understanding story is huge. Understanding editing is pretty big. Having an understanding of directing as well, I think, helps. And communication, because you have to talk to so many people every day, different people, HODs, producers, execs, possibly actors. And often you're delivering not great news because you're saying that didn't work or we can't do that. So it's about having strong communication, being open, friendly, and not blaming, not going in accusatory, but more collaboration. So if you're going in with an actor who keeps getting their line wrong, instead of kind of going in going, this keeps being wrong, it's about working with them and working out why it's not working. If it's something that they're not getting, it's about trying to work out why they're not getting it. And that could be anything. It could just be that maybe the line's a little bit clunky. And actually, if we move this word and this word, obviously you're doing this with the director as well, maybe it feels easier. Or explaining to them what is behind what they're saying. like what's the meaning, what are they actually trying to say with what they're saying. That can really help.
So a good actor presumably be quite open to that, because it'd be quite
Yeah.
helpful to have someone else there who also really understands the script.
Yeah.
So
Usually, I mean, actors that are experienced will tend to lean on you quite heavily if they need to, and they know what you're there for. They understand. Same with directors.
Mm.
If they're experienced, they know why you're there. They know what they can use you for, and they know what you're doing isn't there to make them feel stupid. It's there to help. And I think that's where understanding what matters is important, because what you don't want to be doing is constantly going in, giving notes on things that you're never going to see in the edit. Ever. Like if you're behind somebody and the person whose back of head you're seeing keeps getting a line wrong, doesn't matter.
Or your shoelaces don't match up with the last scene. It's like, well, it's a close up, so
who cares?
Yeah.
They're not even the same shoes. I'm not bothered.
yeah.
Like we're never going to see it.
But actors can be quite good at also maintaining continuity in their head. Like really good ones will be like, oh, I know I walked in holding the cup in my left hand last time, so
Yeah.
and you'll be like, yeah, that matches up with what I thought, and then
Yeah.
great.
Absolutely. And a lot of actors build in their physical performance to their emotional performance, and certain movements will dictate maybe a slight change in emotion. So then it's always the same. Paul Mescal was incredibly good at that. Someone that just sticks out in my brain, that his physical movements within a scene, even if he changes position on a sofa, is when the emotion or the tone of the scene changes. So it's kind of always the same because it informs him. It's when it becomes a little chaotic that it can be difficult. Dinner scenes are a nightmare. If you have multiple people around a table, especially if they're eating or drinking, it can be difficult to keep everybody doing the same thing at the same time. And again, that's where you're like, okay, this is where I need to focus. These are the close-ups that are going to matter. These are the shots where this bit's going to matter. Because trying to keep it exactly the same for a whole 5-page dinner scene that is full of dialogue where 8 people are talking, your head's going to explode. You need to compartmentalize what matters.
So you can kind of focus on where the principal character in the scene is talking to this character, and so maybe the third and fourth character that are in the scene, maybe they're not quite perfect continuity, but most people won't be looking at them anyway. You can kind of, is that what you're talking about?
Kind of, yeah. And like if you're on a wide shot and you know you're never ever going to be on that wide shot, when you get into the edit, you could kind of let things slip a little bit more. And wide shots, not always, but are often top and tail, generally speaking.
What does top and tail mean?
So the start of the scene, they bring you into the scene and take you out of the scene. And they can often kind of be used as a little bit of a rehearsal just to allow the actors to get into it a little bit more. It's why you often start with a wide when you're shooting. You start wide and go closer so you can refine what happens, the performances, until you get into a close-up. Because the majority of your scene is going to play on 2 shots and singles, generally speaking. Not always the way, but and that's when knowing what matters. You know, if a line fluff keeps happening on the wide, you don't have to keep repeating the wide. You can work on it until you get into.
And you would just make a note for the editor and for the production that it's like the wide's got this thing in, but
that's fine.
Everyone will be like, yeah, cool, got it. Understood.
Yeah. So generally, my notes will be like line fluff on line, because I number my dialogue. So line fluff on line 7. And then I'd put the initials of the director, aware and happy to keep moving as we'll be on a close shot for this, or whatever the case may be. And it's all about communicating with the editor and with your director and making sure that, like I said before, the editor knows what works and what doesn't, and if something is wrong, why it's wrong and why we haven't corrected it in that shot.
It's so helpful for both the producer and the editor, the people who aren't on set who didn't see it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like without these detailed notes, it's just so hard for them to interpret what happened, and it could be days of work just going like, okay, let me watch that take. Okay, watch that take.
Exactly, and like the picking up glasses to drink and things can happen on slightly different lines depending on the take, and you can be there for a whole day trying to get it right when it doesn't really matter until you're into a specific shot, and then you match to that. Often you'll match to a 2 shot because that's what you will be coming in and out of a lot from your singles rather than a big wide. So it's all about communicating with your editor, with your director, and knowing how they want to cut it as well. Like, when you're going to be using this shot, this was wrong. Is that going to be a problem for you?
Can you talk about any sort of notable mistakes you've noticed on projects? So an example I'm thinking of is in one of the Hobbit films where Bilbo bursts out of the thing. There's always buttons burst off, and then in the next scene he's got a coat with all buttons. Like things like that. Are there any notable ones that you've noticed, and then maybe your thoughts on why those sort of things might have happened?
Loads. And I think, God, I don't know if I've ever watched anything where there isn't something that isn't quite right. It can be hair that changes from on shoulder to off the shoulder. One of the biggest ones is Hot Fuzz. And when Nick Frost and Simon Pegg are sat in the police car eating cornettos, Nick Frost has got his, and it goes from this big to this big to this big to gone completely, and then back again.
I don't think I've ever noticed that.
You will now.
Yeah.
Might have ruined that for you, sorry.
I guess that's the decision the editor,
Yeah,
the director,
it's
and the
about-
producers are making. Is like, is that so bad that it's going to totally ruin the film? Because I guess they edit based on the emotion and the story,
Performance, it's all about
performance more than
performance.
anything. So
Yeah.
I think some people doing work in film will watch projects and they'll go, well, how on earth could you have put that shot in? And it's like, well, actually, narratively, it was the best.
And
Yeah,
people
performance.
people that aren't in the biz probably won't notice. There's a lot of stuff that I pick up that my husband, who isn't involved in the industry at all, never sees, because he's watching the person talking, not necessarily what's going on around them, whereas I'm trained to watch what's going on.
One of the things you lose when you join film and TV is the ability to just sit back and watch. And I feel like a script supervisor is like that on steroids.
I'm the worst person to go to the cinema with, because if we're watching a film, I'll be like, well, that's wrong. That doesn't match. I did it last night. I can't remember what we were watching. I think it was Fallout. And I was like, well, her hand wasn't there before. I'm terrible. Brian's like, just shut up. You're ruining this for me.
I think that's what, although on the counter side, is when you watch something that's just so good that you forget to be looking at those things, that's when you know you've got a good film
Yeah,
or,
I think
or TV show.
I'm just trained to do it all the time.
So you can't switch
I
it
can't
up.
help it. I can't
Yeah.
help it. But also, I think it's quite cool.
I've seen it with other things. Like a friend made a short film with a violinist, and you could tell that the actor wasn't a violin player if you played the violin, and anyone else couldn't tell. And it's
Yeah.
it'll happen. The TV show Bodyguard, they filmed on an old train for this terrorist scene, and my dad's really into trains. And so I looked at it and I go, that's weird. That's a 1990s train. Why is that operational in 2016 or whatever it is? You know, so we all have our little things that
Yeah.
you can't help but notice it. And I was just like, that's the wrong train. That doesn't make any sense.
It's weird, isn't it? And again, people often just don't notice. And it will always be dictated by performance and what looks best. Always. Doesn't matter what my notes say. I can be like, it's a different coat. They don't care. It's a
Okay,
different
and the best things are so good that even if you do notice, you don't care. That would be the ideal situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's the same, you know, if a film is so much kind of fun, but the script isn't great, you don't necessarily care because you're having such a good time watching it. Doesn't necessarily matter. It's the same kind of thing. Although my job does matter incredibly. I'm not dismissing it. But
If it's a fun script, I won't bother really. You know?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I won't even turn up. Of course it matters, and you should always endeavour to make it the best it can be, but ultimately
The goal is 100% flawless, and if you
Yeah.
go just shy of that, that's better than going for 70% flawless and then being just shy of that.
Exactly. And when I'm on set, there are certain times where I know that something isn't quite right, but if I go in and give a note, I'm going to change the actor's performance, or I'm going to make them think about where the cup is rather than performing and delivering. And actually, in the grand scheme, it probably doesn't matter where the cup is.
Would you say something to the director in that
Yeah.
situation, and then they can decide
Yes.
about that?
Yeah. Always. Like, it doesn't matter how small it is, I'll flag it with the director. But I will say, I think if I give this note, I'm going to change their performance. How important do you think that cup is? I think we can get away with it. Are you happy? And if they say no, go in and give the note because I want this, and this in the edit. Cool. But the last thing I want to be doing is, and it's happened to me before, the last thing I want to be doing is making an actor think about a prop over performance.
That makes a ton of sense. And that kind of really captures the eternal juggling that in film is easiest expressed with like creative versus money.
Yeah.
And I hadn't considered it in that way, of that pressure of continuity over where the actor's focus is.
Yeah, and like I said, it's happened to me before where I gave a note about I can't remember what it was. It was about a prop and when it should be picked up and when it shouldn't, and it completely threw the actor. It completely threw them. I was like, "Ugh."
We record this at Centroid Motion Capture, and we have it where a character needs to make a jump, and you'll put a mark on the ground, and if they have to jump at that mark, when they run up, they will slow down just before the jump
Yeah,
because they're trying to make that mark. If you don't give them a mark and say just jump, you'll get a really realistic jump.
yeah.
And so it was given the mark that actually affected the performance.
And
Because then they're
often-
just thinking about, I've got to hit that point.
Yeah, it's often muscle memory. If you let them just kind of do it, it will roughly be the same every time.
And motion capture is very different from film and TV. Motion capture, because you can just move them in
Yeah.
the in the
Yeah.
Unreal Engine. So, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And you like I said before, you should always aim to have everything perfect, but it's just not the world we work in. Sometimes you have to let something go, and it's about, and I think it comes with time and experience, knowing what you can let go, and there are certain things that you can't.
Like what?
When somebody stands up in a scene or when they move across a room in a scene, because it will affect everyone else's eye line. It will affect what everyone else does. That can't really change. But, when somebody drinks, you can probably end up cutting around in an edit. And there are ways of getting certain shots that get you out of trouble. So clean singles are super useful. If you've got
For anyone who doesn't know, clean single?
so it's a single on a character without the back of somebody else in it. So you might do an over the shoulder shot, which will be over someone's shoulder, ironically enough, and you'll have a bit of the back of their head and a bit of their shoulder in, and it will tie those characters together. But if you go clean, you just see the person on the screen. You don't see the back of anybody else. And what that does is kind of it doesn't tie the other character into a certain movement. So if you're behind somebody and they're drinking, you can still see their hand lift to drink. It just means that you have a little bit more leeway in the edit. You're not tying a lot of actions together. Does that make sense?
It does.
Good.
And what is the advantage of then tying them together?
It helps, especially in an emotional scene. It keeps an emotional it keeps them emotionally together. What you want is for the scene to feel smooth and whole. You want to feel their relationship. If it's a single and you can't see the other person, they can feel quite isolated. Sometimes that's what you want. But if you've got sort of a really emotional scene where people are connecting, you don't necessarily want close.
You can make it more intimate.
Yeah. You might want really close singles, obviously, to get the emotion in the face, but what you won't want is to separate those characters within your coverage. You'll want to keep them as connected as possible.
I hadn't realised going into it how much editing skill goes into script supervising.
Yeah, because it's stuff that you need to capture on the floor. You can't do that in the edit. You can't make you can make an over the shoulder a clean if you do a digital push in or a crop or whatever, but you can't do the opposite. And it's about making sure part of the job is about making sure you have the coverage that you need to tell the story. And that's not just making sure all the words are said on screen. It's about emotionality within that scene and what is it you need to tell, and do you need to get really close on this person to see what it is they're experiencing. And it's that kind of stuff that you're making, especially on a really busy day. You get to the end of the day and you've got 20 minutes left to shoot a whole scene. You're like, oh God. But there are certain things that you need to get, or you're just not going to tell your story. And you're going to watch it on the assembly and go, assembly being
Putting all the shots
quickly
together,
kind of
yeah.
put together
Yeah.
to show the director. You're going to look at it and go, the emotion's missing.
I'm curious, after you finish a job, how long after the job finishes do you keep all this information in your head?
2 minutes.
So you have to get the ability to like
System reset
Yeah.
completely. No, it depends, to be honest. It depends how intense the shoot has been, how long the shoot has been. If I'm going straight into another job, then I kind of have to forget it because there's not a lot of space up here for 2 things at once. But I always keep my reports and my paperwork and my photos and everything else. I keep those pretty much forever, just in case. Once you call wrap on the last day, I still have a little bit of work to do, but generally that's the script supervisor kind of done. You normally maybe have a wrap day where you get all of your final reports together and you send those off. But after that, you're essentially done.
Do the editors get in touch with you and once they're in post?
Occasionally, they might want clarification on something, or if there's pickups. Sometimes, you'll have pickup days a couple of weeks later when they've realised that they don't necessarily have something that they need. Then they'll get in touch, either for you to come and be on set or for you to give your notes to somebody else that's going to be on set. Because if you've got to match things, then yes. But often I'll not try and forget, but clear space for the next one as soon as I can.
What would you say are some of the common misconceptions people have about script supervision?
That all we do is make sure people say the right words. That's the biggest one I come across all the time. Also, you make sure they say the right words. Yes, that's about 3% of what my job is. And it's not about making sure they say the right words. It's about making sure they hit the right beats within a scene, which ties into what I said earlier, that it's not necessarily what's in the script. It's about what that scene is saying and making sure that you say that rather than being very pernickety about the dialogue. Again, that's in conjunction with the actors and the director. If an actor wants to change something, they will often tell me, and I will say to the director, do you mind if this is changed? I feel like it says the same thing, but sometimes the director will want a very specific word because they feel like it's stronger or it says something more. That is the biggest one, I think, is about dialogue, or that we're kind of secretaries that just sit in a corner and type stuff up and don't do anything else. I'm very on the floor. Like, I like to be where the director is, where the first is, where the DP is, and be involved in coverage conversations and right, what we're doing next. Does this line up? And I like to be involved. I like to be there to answer questions, I guess, is the biggest thing. And that's what we are there for. We're there for you to make sure that what you're doing makes sense and cuts together.
And who are the departments you interact with closest?
All of them. Art department is a huge one, because there's prop continuity and set continuity, like evidence boards and things that we were talking about earlier. There's a lot of art department things that span the whole script that will cross over with a lot. Hair and makeup and costume, especially if you're doing direct continuity from scene to scene. Those are the 3 that I...
Presumably all those departments are considering continuity anyway. It's not like it's like everyone else forgets about it because they've got you there. Everyone else, hopefully, everyone else is also thinking about it. You're just the one who binds it all together just to make sure.
Yeah, and I think that's the other misconception, is that you're there for everything. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, each department should be looking after their own continuity. And
props will know that prop was in the last scene because it's their job to do that. You're just
I'm the fail-safe.
Yeah.
I'm like the safety net underneath it all.
Makeup will know that character had a scar from
and
this
what the
fight.
progression of that scar is as well. What they may do is come up to you and double check, is this story day? Is this, is this that? They shouldn't be just relying on me, because I'm not going to lie, I'm not looking at their departments as close as I am other things. I'm not necessarily looking at costume as closely as I'm looking at when a person stands up, sits down, when they pick up a cup, when they do this, what their eye line is. That's the things that is my job and my job alone.
Makes sense.
I will always be, I'll be taking continuity photos and I will be looking at costume and stuff within a scene. I won't be as on it as the costume department are.
Yeah, your focus can only be so much on certain areas, and then you have to go to a lower grade of focus on other things.
That's exactly it. Yeah. The biggest bit of my brain is focused on what I'm looking at on screen, the movements, what people are doing, so that I can match that from shot to shot to shot to shot, and where things are, what shoulder a bag is on. That's what I'll be looking at. What hand a cup is in, when that cup gets lifted, when they take the bag off, when they sit down, when their coat comes off. That's the stuff I'm looking at. I'm not necessarily looking at, is that the same coat as that scene. I will always like have a quick check before we start shooting that they're in the right costume, but it's not necessarily my main focus. That's what costume are there for.
I wonder if we could talk a bit about how you got in at script supervision. So, as you say, can be a one person role, so there might not necessarily be trainees. So I'm very interested, if you are new to it, what sort of job are you on where you're kind of untested, I guess? But what sort of people make good script supervisors? It sounds like if someone was sick of editing and wanted to be on set, they would probably go into it quite easily. But what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, we come from all kinds of backgrounds, and I think because there's no set path with every other department, there's a kind of a trainee ladder. If you're an AD, you're a runner, you're a third, you're a second, you're a first, and any myriad of steps in between. If you're costume, then you start as an assistant and you work your way up. Same with makeup, art department. With us, you are often just a script supervisor, not just, but like there isn't a gradation below that. You just come into it as a script soup. So I started as an AD, as a runner, and then when you're a runner, you kind of go one of two ways. You're either production and you go off set and you do production stuff, or you're an AD and you stay on set and you do AD stuff. I stayed on set because I never wanted to leave set. But I think because I came into it a little bit blind, I didn't go to film school. I had no prior experience at all. I started on commercial sets and sort of factual sets before I went into drama. So I didn't really know what a lot of the roles were until I kind of was on set. And it wasn't until I was probably third in and first in that I learned what a script supervisor was, and started looking over their shoulder and listening to their conversations. And that's kind of how I learned. Don't advise it. There are much better ways now, but that's what made me want to do it, I think, was not enjoying being a first, being a pretty bad first, and knowing that actually my skill sets suit this and my interests suit that way better than what I'm doing now. A strong interest in story and wanting to be part of the story. You do as a first, but it's more about planning, scheduling.
Making the day.
Yeah. For me, script souping is closer to directing. ADing is producer.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
I think the skill sets are more suited to those two jobs. And as much as I don't want to direct, a lot of what I'm interested in is a director's job, and the script soup role felt the right place for me. And 6 years in is. I don't want to do anything else. Coming into it's really difficult in a sense because there isn't a set route. It's a little bit easier now that you have there's trainee roles, there's traineeships. Bad Wolf do one. Screen Skills have trainees, and sort of the bigger budget jobs have assistants. So you can go in that route. A lot of people start as runners and then transition. I think it's important to have an idea of what a set is and how a set works, who does what job, who you need to talk to for what thing.
So if you want to be a script supervisor, get on set in a different role, probably runner, maybe locations, if just want to get a sense of what a set's like. And then if you have an interest, befriend the script supervisor, learn.
Yeah, I've had people shadow me from various departments on that same set, who will then come and sit with me for a half day or a day, and look at courses like the ones I've suggested. There's others. There's Rain Dance, do one. There's quite a lot. If you NFTS, there's quite a few different courses and different levels. So you can do like a weekend. You can do 3-monthers. You can do various different courses now.
What was your first role?
Very first role.
First time being script supervisor.
Was on a short film called Silent Screams. Never got released, unfortunately, but it was a great way of starting to learn. I'd spoken to script supervisors on other jobs where I was an AD.
Was that a paid role, this short film?
No. This one wasn't. I think I've only ever done 2 unpaid gigs as a script soup. Thankfully.
That's where my question earlier a bit about, who's taking on a completely new script supervisor, because it's a big, risk
Yeah,
for a production, but an unpaid short film means
it's a
you're
good
not
way.
totally
Yeah.
inexperienced when you then do get offered a paid.
Yeah, I think student films, short films, unpaid, lower paid short films are a great way of getting in and kind of cutting your teeth. It's a place where you can kind of make mistakes, and it doesn't cost millions, because it can do. If you make a big mistake as a script soup, it can cost a hell of a lot of money. So I think that was a great way of kind of learning on the floor what works for me and how to do the role.
I'm curious how you think people outside of project you're on assess your work, because you can look at it and you can go, oh, I can stop that continuity mistake. But as you've said, if the director is like, I'm fine with it, you don't have the power to take that out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, it feels like a bit like locations in the sense where it's like if you can't necessarily watch a film and from that film assess a locations department, because an art department can. I mean, it always blows me away that the School of Rock classroom was just made in a car park. Like it doesn't exist as a place at all.
Really?
Yeah, I know, right? Crazy. And so in the same way, it's like I can watch a movie and go, oh, I can spot that continuity mistake, but that doesn't mean I can in any way go, well, the script supervisor on this wasn't on the ball,
Yeah.
because they don't have the veto power on that. So how is it, do you think that people then form assessments of that? Because but one of the ways you get around that in locations is I can call people on a job and ask for a review on them, but it's your own department. Where does that kind of assessment come from, do you think? That was a terrible question. You understood what I meant.
Yeah, it's
Does a producer call another producer, presumably? Who was your script
Yeah.
supervisor?
Yeah.
Were they good? Or
pretty
an
much.
editor?
Yeah, and you kind of, I mean, I've got an agent, but before I had an agent, it's all by reputation. So that kind of precedes somebody watching a film you've worked on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's more about, I think most people, at least in the industry, understand that for my role, for a first AD, for anyone whose work isn't necessarily on the screen as such, not that it doesn't matter, but it's not a fair representation of what you did on that job. It's more about talking to the producers, the editors, maybe directors who've worked with you in the past, and how does that person work on set, rather than kind of watching.
Also, because the end result of a project could be really terrible, but the
Yeah.
work that some of the crew did was incredible.
Yeah.
Because it's not necessarily totally related.
But it's it's definitely not a fair representation of the work that a lot of people put in. Why we don't have show reels, because it's utterly pointless. Although I have been asked for one before.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Have you got a show reel of what you've worked on? Why? What for?
What's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten?
This is going to sound awful, but don't take it too seriously. And I think that definitely take your job seriously. Do the very best you can be. But at the end of the day, we're making films, we're making TV. Do not beat yourself up too much over a mistake, because you don't know, especially in what we do, you don't necessarily know how it's going to come out. You don't know how that's going to affect anything, and we're not saving lives. Like, our job's awesome. It's fun. It's really cool. Don't give yourself a hard time, because I used to. And we all make mistakes. We all get things wrong. We all miss stuff. Don't let that rule you. Learn from it. Move on.
Yeah.
Go on to the next job. And also have something else. Don't let this take over your life.
Yeah, I think that's fucking awesome. I think you're hitting on a few different strands of wisdom and blending them together.
Pretty much. I mean, it is about, not protecting yourself, I suppose, emotionally and mentally, and allowing yourself not necessarily to make mistakes, but allowing yourself to learn, and allowing yourself to experience things and move on from it.
Yeah.
Because what are you going to do, unfortunately?
If you'll forgive me from bringing in two kind of quotes. The first is, forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know at the time you didn't know it.
Yeah.
And then the second is from Gordon Ramsay, where it's like, take it professionally, not personally.
Exactly.
So if you make a mistake, you're like, cool, as a professional, I shouldn't do that again.
Yeah.
But I don't need to go home and be like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
Like,
I'm a terrible person because I made that mistake. Oh God, everyone hates me. I can't do this job. I can't do this anymore. Oh God, oh God, oh God.
Yeah.
And I've done that, and it's just not a healthy way of being. It's not a healthy way of learning, and it's not a healthy way of doing your job at all.
Yeah.
It seems like you're tying into your other point about your identity doesn't become your job role.
Yeah.
So you are not just a script supervisor. Therefore, if you do something and make a big mistake, that means you are a big mistake.
Yeah.
It's like you keep it kind of separate, which is where the having something outside of your
Yeah.
job and working in film is helpful, because it allows you to go, no, I am a sum of lots of parts, not just
Yeah.
my job.
Like,
which is true of any job in any, not even this industry, like
No,
any job. If
absolutely.
you make your job your identity, you hit a lot of psychological challenges.
I think it's I don't know if it's more important in this industry, but it's getting better now, but there's always been such a strong emphasis on if this isn't your life, you're not doing it right. No, 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 no. No. I adore what I do. I love our industry, and I always want to be the best that I can be when I'm on set. But I'm not going to be the best that I can be every single day. None of us are. I can't be. Some days I'm tired. I've just done night shoots. I'm really tired. I can't always be perfect, but what I can do is learn.
yeah, and when you're initially breaking in, maybe it makes sense for it to be a bit more unbalanced. But one of the things I've had to learn is like, when you give everything to the job, bizarrely, you end up not being the best you can be at the
Yeah.
job because you let it take too much from you, and it uncenters you, and then you're no longer able to. So you don't even favor the job when you let that take over everything else.
Very much. And I think, like I said, there's always been this thing in our industry of because it's creative, that it should be your soul. I'm like, no, like, no. I love it. I really, really love it. But it isn't healthy to be that obsessed over it. You have to have something else, whether it's another hobby, whether you have like a side hustle, whatever it is, you need to not just be this. I just don't think it's a healthy way of being.
And if it helps for people who are insecure at this point in their careers or job obsessed, like, you're doing that to be better at your job.
Yeah.
So, you can have a hobby, but it's about the industry. I promise you, just have the hobby and you'll be great at your job.
As freelancers, it means that when there are downturns, like with strikes or lockdowns, then you're also not tying your psychology or your mental health into not working at that point in time.
Very much that. And because we do, as an industry, spend so much time at work, shoot days can be incredibly long, and then you've got prep, and then you've got this, and then you've got that. It can be quite a jolt when you're not doing it. And if you're just doing nothing, it can be really damaging mentally.
Yeah.
You need something else, because there will be breaks in work. There always are. Those of us that are freelance and don't work for production companies or work in-house, sometimes there are a couple of months where there just isn't work, especially sort of Christmas type time, December, January, February, November, everything stops. So having something else, whether it makes you money or not, as long as it makes you happy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's really important. And I wish I'd learned that 5 years, 6 years, 10 years ago, even before I started in this industry. I wish I'd learned that my job isn't who I am.
Sadly, it is something that most of us learn when we've been in the industry for a while,
Yeah.
and often because we had to learn the hard way.
Yeah.
Yeah. You kind of hit a wall and you're like, actually, this isn't good. I'm making more mistakes because I'm trying so hard and not actually thinking it through and giving myself the time to sort of reset and to be just me, Stu, rather than script supervisor Stu. I think it's incredibly important to have something away from it.
Yeah, like we understand it with athletes, the idea of like choking under pressure and then they can't do the fundamentals of their sport.
Yeah.
But it very much can happen to you as a freelancer. And you'd be like, why am I doing this? I know how to do this. And then the more you let yourself get in that spiral, the less you're able to do what you're able to do.
Very much. And I think for those of us that are maybe more socially isolated, that can be even worse, because sometimes I know when I wasn't married and I was living on my own, sometimes the only time I saw people was when I was at work, because you work so much.
Yeah.
You don't, you can finish at 8 o'clock at night the only people you really see for 3 months are the people you work with.
And if you have any days off, you just want to sleep and do your
Yeah.
laundry.
But then when that ends, you're like, oh,
And your friends at the industry are like, "Hey, can you do this thing?" You're like, "That's in 2 months, man. I don't know. Like, I might have work. Like, ask me 3 days before, and I'll know."
definitely. But I think, being able to have something else to fall back on, just as a way of either talking to people or for your own kind of sanity, something that you enjoy, that you love, that fulfills you when you're not doing this, is super important.
Are you able to name what yours is? Have you got something you love doing?
Writing, which I think a lot of us have. Running, I run for a club back home, so I do that quite a lot. Travel, really, really love travel. Those are probably my big three. And obviously, I've got a husband and a dog, which take up quite a lot of that.
This feels like an amazing stopping point, but I will be kicking myself if I don't ask you another question.
Do it.
From your own experience as a first and also then the script supervisor, having that visibility, I think you've got a unique perspective on what makes a good first and makes a good director, and I was keen to grab that out of you before we let you go.
I don't know if I necessarily know what makes good first, because I was terrible.
Well, we can flip it. What makes a bad first?
Me. I think for a director especially, it is understanding collaboration and leaning on your HODs and your departments rather than being tunnel vision and just not. Obviously, you have to have your vision and you need to stick to that as a creative person, but understanding that all of these people are here to elevate you and elevate what you're doing. So listen, talk, and for the love of God, prep. Directors that come in knowing what they want, but being prepped enough that when that goes out the window, they can pivot and they don't just break down, is really important, I think, because we're all there to support them, we're all there to help them, but having a leader that knows both what they want and how to adapt to the environment is really, really useful. So prep your little heart out, because it's so important to go in.
Yeah. Like, there's a quote, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, but it's like the value of the plan is not that the plan is then adhered to step by step. It is that you learn the component parts so that when things change, you can still adjust to it.
Exactly. Know your script inside out, know your characters inside out, know your schedule, know what it is you want to say, know all of that before you go in, and know it well, so that when the shit hits the fan, you can move and you can adapt and you can change and still tell the same thing in a slightly different way, and understand that all of us are there to do that with you. We're not there to get in your way. We're there to help you. I think, just being prepared.
That's the hireable skill for a director, to be honest, because you're getting your day and you're achieving the project you set out to achieve, and that's what people will then hire you back for as a director. If you're known to get stuck, if something changes and then you can't make your day or the thing falls apart, you won't get more work as a director.
And it will always change everything. It doesn't matter how you could do your whole shoot in a studio with everything under your control, and something will go wrong, something will change, something will happen.
Yeah, an actor pulls out last minute, or they get
Someone's
stuck, their
ill,
train breaks down, someone's ill.
exactly.
Yeah,
The lights won't work, some piece of kit won't work,
Mm.
your Steadicam's knackered, something will happen and you can't do what it is you thought you wanted to do, and you need to adapt, or you at least need to listen to the people around you telling you how you can adapt, whether that be me saying, well, actually, we don't necessarily need this bit of this scene, or this bit of this scene can move here and we can do this, or your first saying, well, if we do this now, then we can do this later, if we pull this forward, or whatever it is. Listen, communicate, and understand why everyone is there doing what they're doing.
This might sound silly, but it's like the deeper you can put it, the more your conscious brain can then be on other things. So it's like when you're first learning to drive, you need to consciously think about all those steps. Once you've done it enough, you can do other things. Your brain can open up. And in the same way, it's like you can cope with all those changes and challenges if you're not having to keep track of who the characters are, what my beats are, how did I want to frame this shot or whatever. So the more you can free your mind up.
Yeah, and you're essentially compartmentalizing things. So, when you're on set, you're thinking about that scene, and you've got everything else here somewhere, but you've just pulled that box forward for today or for that 3 hours or wherever it is you're shooting that scene, but all that other stuff is still there, so that when the first comes up to you and says, oh, we've just lost this location, you can be thinking kind of about how we adapt to that.
Yeah. And if you're an aspiring director, almost always on set, someone will come to you and be talking to you about what's coming up, or the editor about what's already happened.
Yeah.
So you're
Someone will
always
go, in 6 weeks, this is, and you're like, what?
Yeah, you're never just able to be just in that moment.
And that goes for us as well. Like I will be sat thinking about a scene, or I'll be on set watching a rehearsal, and someone will come and say, oh, Stu, can I just ask you a question about what we're doing in 3 weeks' time? Yeah, but give me a sec. But you know, you have to be able to think like that. You have to be able to think on your feet, and you're not expected to know it off by heart, but at least have what you need with you to be able to give that information.
And you can do that if you prep.
Yeah, if you've prepped, you've got your breakdowns, you've got your notes, and I've barely broken the surface on prep and notes and breakdowns. There's a hell of a lot that we do, that we have to do. Some of it's project dependent. One example being on the job I'm on now, Chelsea Detective, I've got an evidence board breakdown, which is what is needed for what scene.
Yeah.
I've had police board breakdowns before. I've had Christmas decoration breakdowns before. All sorts of things that you need to kind of track, so that it's mostly for me, but you will always get departments going, oh, what do we need? What's this? What's that? Where are we at this point in the story? What's so-and-so been doing? Where have they come from? Because also most people are working on that specific scene. They're not necessarily working with a full script. I always am. And I'm usually the go-to person for those questions. So you're always the person that needs to kind of have everything there ready to go. It was a bit of a tangent. Sorry.
No, brilliant.
That was absolutely awesome.
Good. I'm glad.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I hope it's been
No, mate, absolutely brilliant.